Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Gunlock, the director of the Independent Women's Network. I'd like to welcome all of you to this important discussion of how the Biden administration, his Labor Department, is waging war on working women. Women are losing the right to work independently, and with that, they're losing the options and flexibility that makes their lives their own, easier, more productive, more lucrative. So let me back up and set the stage. Biden's Labor Department recently finalized a rule that makes it harder for self employed workers to be classified as independent contractors. That rule goes into effect, wait for it, on March 11th. That's Monday. This rule will be devastating to freelancers and gig workers nationwide, and it will have a negative economic consequence for entrepreneurs, small businesses, and people who value flexibility, particularly women. To talk about this rule in more detail and to panic you a little bit more, no, I'm kidding. I'm joined by my good friends and colleagues, Director of IWF Center for Economic Opportunity, Patrice Onwuka, as well as Director of IWF's Center for Energy and Conservation, Gabby Hoffman. Ladies, thank you for being here today and sharing your experience and your expertise with our members. I will now hand it over to you, Patrice.
All right. Thanks, Julie. Good to see you. Good to see you, Gabby, and good to see all of our IWN family. We really are. It's sad that we have to do this, but we're at a place now where flexible work is at risk. The entrepreneurial spirit in this country is at risk, and it's because of over-regulation and government overreach. And so I'm so glad that Gabby is here today with me because she has firsthand experience of being someone who could be affected or recently would have been affected by this rule. But again, there are millions of people across the country who are self-employed. They earn 1099 income. They are not an employee of anyone in particular. They're small business owners. They have side hustles. Maybe they have a traditional W-2 job, but they have a little small business on the side. And maybe they're doing it part-time or full-time. But these are people who are classified as independent contractors. Again, not an employee of a company. They are their own business. They are their own boss. And the Department of Labor earlier this year finalized a new regulation that would make it more difficult to keep that independent contractor status. And so today, Gabby and I are just going to really be talking about what this really means. I'll just lay some of the groundwork, and then Gabby, maybe you can talk about who's going to be affected, and then we can talk through like the timeline, what happens next, and all that. And I'm sure that Julie will pop back in with some good questions for us too. But the why. Okay, well, why would the Biden administration even do this? Well, I think that there are lots of reasons. President Biden says he's the most union-friendly president in history, and part of being union-friendly is boosting the unions, their headcount, the amount of revenue that they can get, and their political power. And you do that by increasing the number of people who join unions. Well, freelancers, independent contractors cannot be unionized. And so the way to do, employees can though. So I think part of this is a way to reclassify potentially millions of workers across this country who can, as employees, who can then be unionized. Part of it, I think, is just this idea that a traditional W-2 job is the best type of work for everyone. And boy, is that a violation of our freedom, right? Our worker freedom, our freedom to choose the type of work, the form of work, when, how, where we get it done. And I think that's why independent contracting is so attractive to women, as Julie was talking about. And you know what? This is not just another example of the government trying to micromanage the economy, trying to micromanage the workplace. And so this regulation, as Julie mentioned, is set to take effect on March 11th. We'll get into some of the efforts to push back on it. But Gabby, talk to us about who are the people affected.
You set the stage really well, Patrice. And before I came on fully as our Center for Energy and Conservation Director, I was helping you a lot with this independent contractor policy work. And I still pay attention, and I think I would still be affected because depending upon how far reaching this rule will be once we see as the final language plays out, I feel like they would retroactively go against us, those of us who even work part-time, to see like, okay, do you maintain kind of like a semi-permanent contract relationship with your clients? If you do, then you're an employee. So I wonder if I would be subjected to that kind of scrutiny with the work that I still do on the side as an independent contractor, kind of in this hybrid arrangement, both as a W-2 employee back to W-2 work and also balancing 1099 work. And there are going to be so many professions, not only in kind of my scope of area, like energy and conservation. There are a lot of independent contractors. There are people who work in, oil and gas and nuclear, like so many energy workers are independent contractors. But even outside of that, I mean, basic professions, we have journalists, outdoor writers, florists, makeup artists, hairstylists,
musicians,
general contractors, musicians, absolutely, food workers, so many different kinds of people. And this is just so far reaching. And the fact that it took a final rule for people, I think, to start to care, because IWF has been on the cutting edge of paying attention to this before it became kind of a sexy topic to really latch onto. And there are so many people in the grassroots side stemming from, the fight for freelancers against AB5 in California. So many people have been drawing attention to this. And now it seems like people are starting to care because it feels like all of this push is happening so suddenly, but people didn't realize that so much has been laid to oppose this across, state lines, federal rule lines, the PRO Act, which would have adopted a lot of these aspects of what we're going to be seeing with this new finalized rule. So many people are going to be affected. I think it could affect what are the new numbers now? I think 70 million, 64 million.
Yes, I've seen 70 million Americans as freelancers.
Part-time, full-time, occasional. So I think it's going to affect all of the types of levels of freelancing, not just the full-time. Like I said, I really think they're going to go after the occasional freelancers as well, and the part-time ones, myself included, because they're going to say, like, what lost revenue can we extract from you? Because we view you to be a W-2 employee because of the nature of work that you conduct yourself in. Because I think one of the tenets of the ABC test, which Patrice can go into if you all are not familiar, I think it borrows one of those aspects. I forget which strat, if it was the B or C prong.
Control of work.
Yes, the control of work. So that is very similar to California's AB5 and very similar to the PRO Act's ABC test. So we're seeing elements of these past iterations now come in rule form. And no matter what state you live in, whether it's a right to work state or not to right to work state, this would affect you.
Yes.
I think equally.
Yeah. I think I did a blog post recently called, I think, the 5 things to know about the independent contractor rule. We'll probably throw up a screenshot, but just to talk, 5 things to know about the devastating new independent contractor rule. As Gabby is touching on it, really what the rule does is it changes the definition of who would be an independent contractor versus an employee. And there's been this like ping pong between administrations. The Obama administration tried to restrict independent contracting by changing that definition. The Trump administration said, nope, that's really restrictive. We're going to focus on just 2 key factors. And it was much more friendly, easier for you to retain your independent contractor status. That Trump rule is still in place right now until the March 11th, which is just a few days away. And then the Biden administration said, oh, no, we're not going to go just back to Obama. We're going to make it worse than the Obama rule and make it even more restrictive by implementing 6 different factors. There's no weight given to any factor more than the other. It's going to inject a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty. I think immediately what you're already seeing is a lot of companies are getting calls from their compliance officers, their HR companies that they hire to help them with payroll, calls from their lawyers saying, this is coming down the pike. You need to look at every person that you hire as an independent contractor and figure out, based on these 6 rules, whether they should be an employee. And I think that there are going to be a lot of sticky situations where it's just not going to be clear, because this new rule doesn't add clarity, it adds confusion to that question. And who will determine? More than likely, employers will say, well, you know what? I would rather be safe than sorry and suffer a penalty from the Department of Labor of tens of thousands of dollars for misclassifying my independent contractors. And they will probably just lay off those independent contractors. I think that's what we're going to start to see rolling, which is people who had contracts with companies for years, writers, health professionals, all types of different businesses, suddenly getting a pink slip. And we saw that in California. Gabby, do you want to talk a little bit? You touched on it before, but AB 5, Assembly Bill 5, what happened in California? Because California foreshadows what could happen across the rest of the nation.
It's the petri dish of bad policy. And I hate to say that as someone who is from California. I spent 21 years there, and just seeing what my home state did, I think all of us observed with horror and were aghast at the kind of, I would say, fortitude that the legislature and then also the governor had with just passing this with no questions asked. And what we saw after it shortly went into adoption is that so many people had to forego their full-time work. They became employees. A lot of people who may have had contracts out of California were told, we're going to have to, dear client, we're going to have to, hand you the pink slip, or independent contractor, we're going to hand you the pink slip because it's so burdensome to deal with you and deal with California's new law. Sorry, we have to cut the contract relationship with you. And then you saw so many different people displaced. I don't know if we are able to quantify how many people, individuals. I know it's at least the hundreds of thousands, possibly upwards in the millions because of how big California's population is. But we have heard firsthand with the Chasing Work series that you have so brilliantly led and promoted. We have cataloged those people, those individuals, a lot of women, even a lot of men, what the effects of California's AB 5 did. So it said if you couldn't pass these 3 criteria, you were a default employee. And if you couldn't meet the threshold for that, sorry, you have to be an employee now. And it was so falsely, adopted. We saw people being able to get exemptions. And so because the law obviously is terribly oriented, it was faultily designed. It was susceptible to a lot of problems. We saw people, different professions, being granted exemptions. So it was first the journalists over the cap that if you wrote more than 35 articles, once you reach that threshold for the year, some people did it within a month. And so as different professions and industries got exemptions, people started to recognize, okay, so some people can get carve-outs, the rest of us cannot. So that goes to show, and it's kind of a testament to how very poorly designed and how very problematic the law was, because it's not being evenly applied. Not that it should be evenly applied in this respect, or it's not a good law. We know that, but it was so poorly advertised as a good piece of legislation that so many people had to get exemptions, and they were like, oh no, we don't want to anger this constituency, so let's give them an exemption. So if something is being given an exemption, that's not a testament to the law's goodness. And so we have seen California AB 5 adopted somewhat in a framework to the PRO Act, which is right now dead on arrival in the Senate. But if they, depending upon, how things go electorally, depending upon the makeup of the Senate, if it's a more favorable landscape for freelancers, we wouldn't see this happen. If it's more favorable to union supporters, we could see the PRO Act resurrected again. But right now it's at a standstill. And so because they couldn't pass it in Congress, now this iteration of California AB 5 is found through rulemaking.
Yeah. And that's where we're at now with this new rule. Speaking of those exemptions, there are 0 exemptions from the federal Department of Labor rule. Just so folks know, you're a real estate agent, you are a bookkeeper, you are a tutor, you tutor kids after school. The gig economy, part of the impetus behind this was also just to get at the gig workers. Maybe you're delivering food for Uber Eats, or you're a DoorDash driver, or you're doing online shopping for folks. And the idea was, well, those people should be employees, and Uber or Lyft needs to hire them. That's a whole other, unfortunately, in trying to go after the gig economy folks, and they shouldn't, but in trying to go after the gig economy, you've got these lawmakers who are now bringing into a dragnet millions of other people in hundreds, thousands of different occupations across the country. So this is sweeping. I mean, I think we can't say it with more alert than to say that this is sweeping. It's going to have national implications. We'll start to see those implications happen pretty quickly and pretty soon. But just to the point that you made about Chasing Work, our storytelling campaign, it's on our website. But we really reached out and found people in California who were hurt by AB 5. And tell that story. We had Santa Claus, a great Santa video. This man Patrick Turnbull, he is a professional entertainer, and he lives as Santa Claus. Like his home is called the North Pole. He drives a little red Santa vehicle, but he is, like many professionals, they carve out a life for themselves because they have competing priorities and they still need to be able to earn an income. And for some of the people we talk to, their mothers who are raising their kids, women who are sick. One woman had breast cancer, fought it 3 different times while raising her family. And the only way she was able to support her family and beat breast cancer and know that her kids were okay was because she had the flexibility to work around her schedule. She couldn't be in a traditional 9-to-5 job. She couldn't be anyone's employee. These are, it's the flexibility is important to people for so many reasons. For most of the time, and based on surveys Gabby and I have looked at, for a good half, if not more, freelancers say they simply cannot work in a traditional 9-to-5 job because they have personal circumstances. And we're hearing stories. We've been putting out the feelers. We're asking folks to share their story nationally of being an independent contractor, why flexibility is important to you. I just got off the phone yesterday with another independent contractor. Her husband was diagnosed with ALS. She was a nurse, had decades of experience as a nurse. She literally had to turn her entire life around to be a caregiver to her husband. And because she worked as a nurse in so many settings, Gabby, she is able now to be a writer. So she's now a freelance nursing writer for the nursing profession, and people hire her because of her technical experience. And because of that, she said, Patrice, this is what keeps me off of welfare, off of food stamps. I can take care of my family. I can take care of my husband and be the primary breadwinner and caregiver and not be dependent on the government in doing so. So this is when I see this attack by federal lawmakers, by states on freelance work, this gets us riled up.
As it should.
Riled up is good. Gabby, can you talk to us a little bit too, also just about not just the impact, but what other states that we're seeing this pop up, and we're talking about the federal regulation, but have other states also been trying to hit this new restriction?
Absolutely. We've seen this play out in, funny enough, blue states for the most part. Massachusetts has been extremely aggressive about wanting to redefine what an independent contractor is or isn't. But we've seen a lot of pushback there, surprisingly, in the Bay State. I know that's your adopted state, home state. And we've seen pushback from Uber drivers, regular conventional independent contractors. And the argument, I wanted to talk more so about this quest for fighting misclassification. We have a lot of laws on the books already, which should be addressing real, true, proven instances of worker misclassification. But what we're seeing, these, semblances of AB5 or the PRO Act or this final DOL rule, we're seeing that they are wanting to contort what misclassification is and then kind of go in the to the extreme and forcibly reclassify people. And it costs more than even fighting so-called misclassification of workers. So we see tenfold, fivefold times more if we're breaking down the cost of what would be fighting misclassification. In our analysis at IWF, we have found that the cost of forced reclassification could be 5 to 10 to 12 times a lot more than fighting misclassification, which there are already laws in the books to do. So why are they creating this new regime, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, when it can already adequately address it? And certainly there are probably lots of rules that are extraneous and that are not necessary, but the basic parameters that have already been implemented can already sift out, instances of misclassification and not usurp people's autonomy to choose how they work flexibly, how they may choose to do a hybrid situation either. So yes, we have seen blue states kind of take this template. Rhode Island is another example as well. I think we have seen Illinois try to, create their own AB5, all these kind of blue states. And we've seen actually on the opposite end, red states create protections for freelancers. West Virginia is the most prime example that I want to point to, where we haven't seen anything so robust like that, where there have been, wide sweeping protections for independent contractors at the state level. I think it was a great law. I think it was like reassuring or reaffirming the 20-part IRS test, but at the state constitution level. So I think we would like to see more of that with IWF, kind of those protections there. But we haven't seen as many. We've seen, unfortunately, a lot more AB5 type situations at the state level. And we haven't thankfully seen any eroding in, let's say, red states or purple states quite yet, if they have like a divided government situation, because this issue actually crosses partisan lines. I think people don't know that a lot of the grassroots activists that our organization has dealt with are a lot of people from the left. It's amazing to see that. And I think you could speak to that as well with some of the folks we've interacted. I know the Santa Claus, who's been featured in Chasing Work, he's not conservative. He's of the center left. And actually, a lot of the women leading the charge to fight the DOL rule and all these other kind of attacks on freelancing tend to be center left. It's amazing to see that, but they feel very voiceless in their movement, in their cause. And they've actually found refuge in working with organizations like ours, interestingly enough.
Yeah. Patrick Turnbull, the Santa that we did the video on, and folks, go to our website and watch the video. You're gonna love it. But he is very progressive, and we had him on a press call, Gabby, and he started veering off just a little bit, and I was like, oh, okay, that's right. But to bring it back, Patrick, this is a hitting across political partisan lines. So to get into what's going to happen next. So there are a couple of different tracks going on. Maybe Gabby, you can talk about the court tracks, and I'll talk about the legislative tracks. So if this rule can be overturned, it can be. Like every regulation can be overturned. The question is, how do we get it done? One of the tracks is legislatively. And just yesterday, two champions in the Senate and the House, Senator Bill Cassidy, who's the ranking member of the Senate Help Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, he introduced the Congressional Review Act from the Senate. And then his on the House side, Representative Kevin Kiley from California, so he knows well the damage of this regulation. He also introduced from the House Workforce and Education and Workforce Committee. They both introduced what's called a Congressional Review Act. This is a tool in Congress's toolbox that allows them to overturn regulations passed by different federal agencies. So this CRA, Congressional Review Act, or CRA for short, would, if approved by the House and by the Senate and signed into law by President Biden, would overturn this independent contractor law. Easy peasy, right? Well, conservatives are more than likely to vote for it and approve it in the House, and hopefully along across party lines. We're working to try to get some Democrats to jump on board and support it. The CRA was launched with over 30 co-sponsors, which is great, so it can get out. It can possibly pass the Senate, and that's why it's so important that we're letting these members know how important this issue is. President Biden has already said he's likely to veto this Congressional Review Act. Not surprisingly, this is one of his babies. His Department of Labor put this out there. And so the Congress would have to have an even larger margin to pass the CRA. That said, things can change politically, and we obviously running up against an election. So things could happen from the legislative side, which is, no matter what the case is, it's so important that we are, our members are making their voice heard, ensuring that, number one, the CRA passes, the Congressional Review Act passes, and that those who vote against it are held accountable and are going to have to face their constituents and say, why did you vote against flexibility? Why did you vote against work for people who cannot work in a traditional job? Why would you oppose something like that? Gabby, you want to talk about the legislative, the judicial track?
Yes. So when we find ourselves in kind of this murky waters legislatively, another tool as part of checks and balances is to utilize the courts. And we are seeing different groups stemming from the Fight for Freelancers, individuals there, I think the Pacific Legal Foundation, and lots of other either trade associations or individuals who have been lawyering up, examining what the rule is and the legality of it. And I think with the CRA, because if I remember with the CRA correctly, if a rule was invalidated previously, it can't be retried again. I know for the energy side, we have explored a lot of that at the center. So I'm thinking because this has been tried before, legally, maybe some of these plaintiffs are arguing that this rule has been experimented with before. It was previously invalidated, or the courts found it to be null and void. And so on those grounds, I bet you they're trying to challenge it there. But just in general, I think they have found the arguments that this is invasive. This would, have a lot of First Amendment implications. I know some Court of Appeals courts have said that, well, you can't use that argument. So maybe they're going to use like the Commerce Clause. And so it's interesting, how the courts have reacted to kind of the arguments made against these kind of forceful mandates. But we could see a rebuke of the DOL rule coming from the district courts. And I don't know if it's made its way to the Supreme Court yet, but the Supreme Court seems to be potentially open. I'm not sure if it's going to be this session or this judicial session, because right now on the docket, I don't think there's any freelance laws or freelance lawsuits currently being challenged. But maybe in the next docket, if this case was able to make their way, climb up, from the lower courts to the Federal Court of Appeals, and then eventually make its way to the Supreme Court. But we haven't seen that quite yet. But if a court case were ever to go to the Supreme Court, which would then reaffirm and say flexible work is constitutionally protected, the DOL exceeded their rulemaking authority here, send it back to Congress. Congress, please fix this with respect to the Fair Labor Standards Act and whatnot. And because I think they're also making the argument that this is not within, let's say, DOL's, purview. It's Congress who should be determining, worker classification. So we could be seeing those arguments made, and it's just a matter of following those court cases. But we do see a lot of challenges starting to come about preemptively in response to this rule being finalized.
Yeah. Julie, I think we're bringing you back in to take some questions from our members.
Hey. Yeah, we have a couple questions. I'm going to start you off here. Will setting up an LLC make someone immune from regulation?
From my reading of the regulation, it is not a guarantee that would protect the LLC will protect you. I think in California's case, that some LLCs that were created still fell under the California regulation, and in talking to some different lawyers who've reviewed this DOL federal regulation, the LLC status does not necessarily protect you either. And also, just an aside about small businesses, we didn't really mention it, but a lot of small businesses will be affected because they depend on hiring freelancers for their operations, right? We profiled a florist who, she has seasonal work. She gets lots of work gigs during the wedding season, but the rest of the year she doesn't. To tell her that she has to hire all of the moms, the working moms who she contracts with during wedding season as full-time employees or part-time employees.
With all the regulations that come with that.
Benefits, paid time off, all of that stuff, that would put her out of business. So an LLC will not necessarily protect you. And frankly, LLCs will be affected, and S corps and small businesses, whatever your structure, will be affected by this rule.
It's so funny as I listened to you guys, I was sort of in the back room there and I was listening to you guys. This is another example of Democrats creating a policy. You could give them the benefit of the doubt and say that this is, heart right. They're trying to solve something, but it creates more problems. And then eventually they're going to swoop in, they're going to change the law again and claim that they fixed this when they created the problem in the first place. And I think we've seen a lot of that happening in this country over the last couple of years. Let me go on to another question. How will the new test implemented by the Department of Labor rule conflict with right to work states? You guys mentioned this a little bit. Conflict to right to work states and states like California that have the AB5 test.
That's an interesting question. I think one state recently that solidified, I think preemptively, they anticipated the DOL rule. It would be Tennessee. I think they strengthened their right to work protections. So if anything were to have been adopted federally, maybe it would nullify it. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm wondering if states already have those protections, right to work states in particular, which could potentially nullify these type of prongs from being, let's say, forcefully adopted. But I think it's also going to be a matter of the attorneys general of each state to decide, if this is going to affect our right to work standing, we got to file a lawsuit. So we could probably see, I think, Patrice, you probably heard chatter that probably attorneys general would say, well, this is going against kind of our individual state constitution. So we have to fight it back and show that this would actually undermine state law. And I know sometimes there is the supremacy clause of sometimes federal rules superseding state, but there are some kind of carve outs to my understanding. But I'll send it to you now. But that's what I feel would be the case where they could say, like, our right to work laws can supersede, and right to work is also federally codified as well. So they could also point to that and say, like, you can't really interfere with individual states as well.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think you might consider it preemption. So would this federal regulation preempt what states have? I went to the DOL's, a part of the rulemaking. They also had this Q&A section, and they actually answered this question about, okay, well, what happens if states already have ABC tests or more restrictive regulations around independent contracting? And they said, oh, no, this won't conflict. Now, do we believe them? It's going to be hard. I don't think so. I think this regulation affects anyone who comes under FSLA, the Federal Standard.
Fair Labor Standards Act. Yeah.
Fair Labor Standards Act. Thank you. So many acronyms, folks.
Yes.
And that law. It deals with overtime rules. It deals with lots of different types of rules, not necessarily wage and hour, but like the IRS has a different designation or determination for independent contracting. That's still different from what FSLA does. And so it's confusing. And I think the short answer is we don't know. What I could see an employer preemptively doing, particularly larger employers, is saying, okay, California has an ABC test. DOL now has this new 6-factor test. This state has this test. They may just look at their workforce and say, you know what? I'm just going to lay everybody off and make my life easier.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to be facetious. I mean that to be practical. And so these are kind of the challenges that something like this rule really brings up. If you're in a right to state work, right to state, I almost said right to life. No, right to
different
work.
podcast.
Different podcast, right to work state. I hope that your protections from a state level would stand, and they should. But this is federal, and federal and the federal law is totally different when it comes to the classification. So again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure. You can go to the Department of Labor's website and see what their answer is, and still, I would be surprised if this does not preempt a lot of states.
You know, Patrice, you brought up a really good point there of some employers may just let everyone go out of caution. Nobody wants to get, I don't know how they would exactly enforce this. I don't know what employers would see, but there might be this sort of fear out there that they'll just preemptively do this. And that is, again, that's part of what's so harmful about these policies, is really scaring businesses, killing innovation, killing jobs, in a way that, again, out of an abundance of caution of the government coming after you, as if that, because that never happens, right? So I want to move on here. But before I do, I want to make a point to anyone listening. We've got a lot of viewers out there, and you can ask your questions right now. We have people monitoring our YouTube channel and our X, formerly Twitter, page, where these are live. So if you have questions, you can comment there, and we'll try to get those out there. I do have another question here. What is the likelihood of the Congressional Review Act passing, and what exactly happens when a CRA passes?
Well, the likelihood of it passing the House is very good. And even passing the Senate is also good. We need support, bipartisan support. Like I said, the CRA was introduced yesterday with 30 co-sponsors in the Senate. So that's a good ways to the 50% mark, and 50 plus one is a majority right there. The challenge is going to be a presidential veto, and so you have to be able then to do another vote and it to be greater to overcome a presidential veto. I think that's where the challenge is, and so that's why it's important for our lawmakers to hear from us. I live in a blue state of Maryland, but my lawmaker is going to be hearing from me about this, because the CRA is going to need Democratic support, just like it's going to need Republican and Democratic support. And so if the CRA passes, it simply would overturn the DOL rule that's about to be implemented and go back to what is the previous, which is still in place for the next few days, but it's the Trump era regulation that was really, like I said, very friendly to independent contractors. It had multiple factors, but really honed in on two. And if you could say, okay, yeah, check the mark on these two, you're good. The analysis ends there. You're going to be considered an independent contractor. A lot of clarity, a lot of simplicity. And I have it on good authority that I think if there is a change of administration, I think there are going to be some really smart people who will get to work immediately on overturning this Department of Labor rule. That said, that's just the ping pong ball of administration to administration, and that's why Congress enacting this in law is really the gold standard needed.
Yeah, businesses cannot be dealing with this, as you call it, a ping pong ball. It makes life so difficult for them. I think this is a really interesting question, and I know we're coming up here on the end, but I do want to get to these next two questions. What is the root of the Biden administration's attack against worker freedom? And I want to get a little bit more specific. Where's the money? It's always money. Who cares enough about this to push this? Where are, sort of where are the bodies buried?
Gabby, I'll let you take it.
Yeah, I think it's an animus towards people who think and operate independently. And I think it's a lot of grievances from the big labor side, because they're very resentful of the fact that with all the assurances, all the different kind of carve outs and gestures from this administration, oddly enough, we're seeing a shrinking of their workforce under Biden. With all their lobbying campaigns, with all their organizing campaigns, media on their side, and they see these shrinking numbers and they respond, "Oh my gosh, we're being attacked. This is awful. How dare people not want to be in a union job and work like this, because it means more control over the nature of people's work." And so I think it's partly out of resentment. I think it's partly out of not understanding where the economy is moving. And it's scary, sure, but we don't live in the 1930s anymore. And we have a very different workforce now. And it's a good thing, because I think it was very strict previously and very limited as to what you could do. And especially for women, we talk about family policy. Everyone's like, what are ways to promote women, to get married and have children? I really think, and I'm very, passionate about this, that if you allow women to have more flexible work arrangements, they're going to be more inclined to want to settle down, have kids,
yes,
get married, and do all this, because these constraints,
because it's a binary. So many women think of it as a binary choice. If I can work, I can have kids, but in this way, I mean, I've done this for 15 years at IWF. Yes. I was a work at home mom, so I got to be home with my kids. Patrice, I know you enjoy being with your kids and working from home. And it doesn't, and that leads to Gabrielle. I cut you off there. So finish that thought, but I have a follow-up question.
Yeah. So I think it's just a hesitance and reticence to kind of this new form of work, which is not supposed to displace people. It's supposed to offer new creative ways for workers to work, whether it's a hybrid situation or full-time, remote, flexibly working independently. And even traditional workplaces are saying, you know what, we like this kind of hybrid structure, or we want to hire independent contractors, not because we want to exploit them or, pay people less, but it just works better for people. And workers, especially female workers, are a lot happier. They're reporting higher levels of satisfaction, having a work-life balance, whether it's hybrid or whether it's working full-time independently or part-time independently. And we see, another thing too is this insistence on a so-called traditional work framework because they're like, well, we can only offer you benefits. And this is something I wish we could have explored. This is another, podcast or live stream idea, but we really kind of like with school choice and these, school choice accounts, or health savings accounts, divorcing the employer from your healthcare
Yes.
really will open the door
Mhm.
through portable benefits to allow workers to have more flexibility, all the while still, working for a traditional work arrangement, or even, taking their healthcare savings to, flexible work or a new company. So that's also what they're afraid of. They're afraid of the market offering a better healthcare or
Yeah.
benefits package, I think, when it's decentralized more. So we see a hesitance to embrace deregulation or to embrace kind of this new mode of work, which takes them out of the equation, cuts off their revenue source, doesn't make, doesn't act as a vehicle to fully supply, let's say, Democrat Party politics. And it really just unleashes creativity. And that is why they're really afraid to lose their stronghold. And that's why Biden has really elevated them. And I think even with all these government levers and appeasements and these gestures and these media campaigns, it's not working. And they see that and they're scrambling and they're nervous. So that's why they're using this tool with the DOL.
This is a follow-up question on that. We know that young women overwhelmingly vote Democrat, that the Republican Party and frankly, the party that supports freelance workers has a really hard time attracting young women and young women. And yet, a recent sort of trend we're seeing is these viral videos. And I know both of you have seen these of these young women. They're crying on screen. They're sort of
Oh.
saying, I can't take this 9 to 5 rat race. And you guys probably saw the video that sort of went viral. Matt Walsh and a couple other people responded to it, which I didn't think the response was always nice, because so many people tend to call these women stupid. And I don't like that. But, these women were saying things like, I get up, I go to work, then I come home and I'm exhausted. I can barely cook for myself. I can barely go to the gym. And so I don't understand this disconnect. Why is it so hard? Are we not reaching those women? Do they not understand that
Mhm.
there is a party out there that really wants to make it harder for you and that you have no choice but to go to that 9 to 5 job? Um, Talk to me a little bit about that, because I feel like this message isn't getting to them.
Yeah, this is why we do what we do at IWF, truly, which is, to really help to connect the dots between the policies and the day-to-day life. I think I know the video you're talking about, where this girl was just in tears, a young woman, single, hoping, just not satisfied with her life.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure she's at this point probably figured out how to monetize that viral video. And that's the thing. So many millennials and Gen Zers are really savvy with this thing and are really able to carve out a nice side hustle, potentially
Yeah.
even a short-term career. Maybe they don't stay as a digital content creator, which is actually a thing as a career.
Mhm. I know.
But what they don't realize is they are a 1099 worker. They
Yes.
literally
Exactly.
are a 1090. So what
Exactly.
they're trying to do, educate on social media to say, you know what, you are a photographer. You're the one who's taking your bestie's photos and videos when she's going to the mall or buying her new Louis Vuitton, and she's monetizing her brand and all of this. She's paying you. You are a 1099 worker, and you could be affected. And really trying to connect the dots, because young people have been told that socialism is terrible, that the capitalism and the free market system is all about oppression, when in fact it's really
Yeah.
about freedom, and
Mhm.
that the left is for choices. No, the right are for your choices when it
Right.
comes to what you do with your time and your labor. And the left is the one who wants to tell you there's one way, one cookie cutter, one way to success. Oh, by the way, you need to climb the corporate ladder even if you hate the corporate situation. And the
Yeah.
right is saying, yeah, climb the ladder if you want, stay at home if you want, work part-time if you want. Just, we want to ensure that our economy is so robust that it's creating all of these options for you. And so that's a lot of what we do at IWF and IWV.
Well, I hope that girl is watching right now,
I
because
hope so too.
I hope they're all watching. Listen, I want to end with this question and this came in from a member. What can IWN members do to stop the Department of Labor independent contractor rule?
The Action Center, right?
Well,
Yes.
yes. Why don't you
I
tell
would
them about that?
say, yeah. So there is an Action Center that you can weigh your comments on. We have a pre-filed template. So just put your name, your information, whatever you're at liberty or feel comfortable and at liberty to share. And then we have a pre-filed template. You can add your own words and then just basically lend your perspective and click yes, and it'll go to your member of Congress according to what zip code and address you put. But even going back to the previous question too, if I may, I think it's just not a sexy topic because there are certain things that trend on social media. And a lot of influencers like independent contracting, that doesn't roll off the tongue sexy. So that's why I think it's a little harder to translate. But Patrice is absolutely correct. So many people make money from the creator economy. Maybe they're not filing their taxes because if I was, I've made some money off of social media. Like I once went viral doing some lumberjack work on Facebook and I made a few $1,000s. I had to pay taxes on those too. So I saw that.
Okay, we're gonna have to see that lumberjack
Yes.
video. That is,
Yes.
yeah. We'll be
My
sure to
favorite one.
we'll be sure to get that loaded up the next time we
But
meet.
I think there's a disconnect because they may not be handling their expenses, or maybe they're not paying taxes, or maybe they defer to someone else to pay their taxes for them and they don't see how much is taken out of their share. But I think it hasn't been able to galvanize people because I don't know, maybe they're like, maybe it's stuffy, it's economic, economics is kind of like stale and boring and for men and whatever. And so we don't think that's the case here at IWF, but it hasn't been really radicalized, I would say, much like border security has.
Right.
And I hope it could reach that, not because I want bad things to happen, but I would hope the level of outrage of the attacks that are being waged on independent contracting can similarly be replicated like that of border security and all these other issues. I don't know how we make that possible unless someone very prominent comes out and says, I'm losing my livelihood because of Biden's DOL rule, like maybe an actress or maybe someone who has a lot of clout. Until we see that, or until we see such a displacement of this big magnitude, we won't see it rise. But I think it still has the potential, and people still do care, but it's kind of billed as like this wonky issue. But if you have a say of this, use the application on IWN and just make your voice heard. Make social media videos, tag IWF,
Yes.
tag IW Voice, tag IWN, me, Patrice, all of us. Make us aware of your videos and just tell your story. I think that's also very helpful too, because I think a lot of our staff too, we do a lot of multiple gigs. We do 1099 work. I still do 1099 work. Patrice does. Julie, all of us do. So we're all going to be affected somehow, and really channel that frustration, but also your love of freelancing, I think, through social media, written word, op-eds, and come back to us as a resource, and we can help you too.
It's great. Patrice, do you want to add anything on to that? No, she did it.
That's what Gabby said.
Well, I will tell you also, we are the Independent Women's Network. We also are affiliated with IWV and IWF. But the network was created specifically to get women more active. So do the things, get on the IWNnetwork.com and check out that action center. Become a member of IWN. We have so many things going on, live events like this, trainings. Again, we have action centers. We also have a resource center that offers people talking points, draft letters. We've really tried to make it easier to get involved with your community. So again, if you are not already a member of IWN, please join today. Again, IW engages in multiple policy issues and enhances people's freedoms, opportunities, and well-being. Plus, members gain access again to our regular programming. So it's definitely worth it. Again, it's IWNetwork.com. You can learn more there. And don't forget to urge your legislators to support worker freedom through our most recent action center, as we brought up before. You can check it out there. Thank you so much, Gabby and Patrice, for coming on. This was excellent. And it sounds like just in this conversation, we thought of like 15 other things that we need to talk about. So let's do it again soon.
Thank you, Julie.
Absolutely. Good to be back.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.